All right, guys, sorry about the quality of the image today. It won't matter because you're going to be looking at my slides for most of this video. But basically what happened was I made a valiant effort to record this lecture a few days ago. However, my desktop computer in my home office here, it just kind of died on me. It just went kaput. And it's brand new, so I'm sending it back and getting a new one. But for the meantime, I will be using my laptop for these last few lectures, which I have decided is going to consist just of this one. There was originally going to be one more after it, but as I was looking through and trying to make it a little bit more interesting, I realized that the content is just not really relevant for you guys. It's very theoretical, and I had originally intended to put it at kind of a conversation for the class, but since I'm not doing any real-time stuff with you guys doing this virtual teaching, it's not really going to work out. So instead, I'll send you guys an email and I'll probably make another video describing what you're going to do, but it's basically just going to be this lecture and that's it. So why don't we get into it? And this is our last lecture then, and it will be groups and teams. So I'm going to share my screen just to get it started, and this will be our slides. So let's open them up. So for the groups and teams lecture, as you can see on your screen right now, I have decided to use the Fellowship of the Ring from the Lord of the Rings as our theme. This is because I am obsessed with, if you haven't realized by now, a lot of sci-fi and fantasy element things, and Lord of the Rings is the OG. It is my all-time favorite since I was a little kid, and I think that no other group maybe better represents a team than these 9 here in the Fellowship of the Ring. And again, I try to balance using examples with real-world examples, but I'll definitely be referencing the Lord of the Rings a little bit throughout this lecture because they are our team's theme. So groups and teams, teams and organizations specifically. Why do we use teams in organizations? So there's a number of reasons why we might choose to utilize teams. And among them, listed by these authors, were that 1, it is an efficient use of time. So you have a job to do, you could probably get it done more quickly with more hands on deck. 2, it enhances innovation and creativity. And this is a whole other topic that we could get into for ages, but I think the idea is generally that whether or not individuals or teams are more creative depends on a number of factors. But if the right factors are in play, so you have a team that's close-knit, they have varied ideas, and they feel safe and comfortable to share their ideas, and there's an opportunity to be doing that brainstorming type of idea, they're definitely going to see a lot more creativity when you use a group rather than an individual. And you can imagine why that might be, right? You have perspectives that might never have met previously coming together. That's innovation. So teams are very innovative. And they're also better able to integrate information. So you have different sources, they can bring everything together, they can rationalize, they can debate, they can come to the best conclusions. They're also better at delivering products and services. They promote organizational learning and development. So the team learns, the organization grows, those sorts of things. And just in general, at this point in our workplace history, if you will, as things are changing rapidly towards computerization, AI, automation of work, a lot of things that used to be done, especially around the Industrial Revolution, they were, very individually oriented. You just do your one task on your work line or whatever. But now the modern workplace, it's almost impossible to suggest that for the majority of our tasks, an individual would perform better than a group. Of course, we have different ways of structuring groups depending on the job in order to promote better productivity. But just in general, it almost doesn't matter anymore what the task is. A group is probably going to do better than a single person, as long as you structure the group in the right way. And so we're going to talk about from there also like types of teams and when you might use them. But we have a lot of research related to teams. So the reason we are growing our teams related research in IO is because we've studied a lot of stuff, even up till now. So you've been in this class the whole semester, we've talked about job analysis, we've talked about performance, we've talked about selection, and we talked about personality and individual differences, training, turnover, motivation, stress, and all the things we've talked about up until now. Most of the studies that I've brought up and that I've said, oh, this relationship exists, this leads to that, most of those things were done with individuals. So you study how people are affected, but they're all maybe reporting or being reported on just for themselves. And we cannot safely say all of these relationships we found would be the same if we looked at the team level. We can't say that for sure. We couldn't say that it would be the same at any higher level of analysis. And so we're growing this interest in not just teams research, but teams research as well as other multi-level analysis, which means, you're one person and you exist within a team, which might exist within a department, which might exist within an organization, which exists within the country. So you can see how there's kind of layers to it and a nesting variable sort of thing. And so we're starting to become interested in how these higher levels affect these lower levels, how the lower levels affect higher levels, and how things might be different at different levels. So rather than knowing, intelligence and conscientiousness predict individual performance, we want to know what predicts team performance. It might be the same, it might be some the same and some different, or it might be totally different. So researchers started looking into these things. So performance and satisfaction were big issues for individual level variables, so we need to know how they work for teams. And we also are being introduced to new variables that don't exist really at the individual level, such as team conflict. So I guess an individual could have some inner conflict, but it's not the same, and it's not really important because it's rare and unusual. It's not the same as a team conflict. Teams being made up of multiple different people introduces different styles of conflict and management and issues that we couldn't see at the individual level. So this increased prevalence of teams that we're seeing across all organizations, it also requires an increase in research that focuses on teams. If we don't do this research and we just say, oh, it's going to be the same for everyone or at any level, then you fall into what is known as the atomistic fallacy, which is just an assumption that individual relationships are the same at the team level of analysis. And of course, you probably intuitively know that there's a chance that a lot of them will be the same or similar, but it's not right to just assume it. You have to find proof. And out of all of the research we're going to do and that we have done, we're bound to find some things that are different. So I also want to talk about groups and teams and groups versus teams. So the term group and the term team are often used interchangeably, especially even in research, but they're not necessarily the same exact thing. If you want to be very technical, they refer to slightly different collections of individuals. A group is a collection of individuals who work together, so they might be in the same department or location or organization. They might share some of the same resources, rules, policies. A lot of factors might be similar, but they might not necessarily be working really interconnectedly. They typically have their own jobs, their own roles, and they're largely independent of one another in these roles. And so they are group. You could group them as members of some broader group, like they all work in IT or they all work in the same company. But as I said, they're not necessarily interdependent with each other. And they also might only work together for a limited amount of time. However, a team is an interdependent collection of individuals who work toward a common goal and share responsibility for specific outcomes. And that common goal thing is really important, as is the interdependence. So basically the emphasis is on the interdependence. The team, no team member could really function without the other team members. And to be more specific, usually because the team has this common goal, that once the goal is completed, that's when the team ends. And up until that point, the team exists for the purpose of that goal. Whereas, if you have a group, each individual might have their own individual goals. So technically, these are the differences. We see that they could almost be used interchangeably, or maybe it's kind of on a spectrum, but to be technical, this is where the differences lie between the two. So what are some types of teams? Let's go over a few right now. These are the 4 that I'm going to talk about: quality circles, project teams, production teams, and virtual teams. And I'm going to go through them one at a time for you right now. The first is quality circles. They basically involve a number of people, usually 6 to 12, who will meet in regular intervals, maybe weekly, bi-weekly, etc. And their goal is to identify work-related problems and generate certain ideas to fix these problems or increase productivity or product quality. Specifically, this originated in Japan, and these groups or teams usually lack formal authority. It's more of a, let's get together and make suggestions, and then let's pitch these suggestions to the management or the people who can actually implement them. So these are very kind of unstructured, but you might pick experts or people who you feel have a critical eye in order to do this. Quality circles, the research on them shows what's known as a honeymoon effect when you do the research in the United States, which, as you might expect, means that at the beginning there's this honeymoon where everything looks good, everybody's really excited about it, and you see increases in everything that you were hoping to fix. But over time, those improvements don't stay. So you kind of have that inverted U. There's a steep upward turn and all your positive outcomes, and then it tapers off or it goes back down to normal. That's probably because of kind of that Hawthorne effect that I've mentioned before, where people kind of react positively just to the fact that someone is doing something, but it may not be the something that is actually making a difference, but just the fact that anyone's paying attention. So when that's the case, I guess eventually that the novelty and the excitement of that change might wear off. There could be other reasons as well, but interestingly, we do find that research in Japan shows that these quality circles are much more effective. And that may be because these circles are tied to more outcomes. They have a relationship with the broader culture. They affect pay and promotion schedules, and they're reinforced throughout the organization. So maybe these quality circles in Japan, they're a little bit more hands-on. And also the cultural differences can play a role. You know, we talked about Japanese collectivism, and power distance is different. So that can definitely be a factor as well. So that is the first type of team, is quality circles. The next is project teams. These might be the most, I guess, very, what's the word, like a poster child of what a team is. And that is because they are created specifically to solve a particular problem or a set of problems and disbanded as soon as that problem is solved and the project is complete. So it's something like a task force that's built just for a purpose. They usually have a large amount of autonomy, and they also depend a lot in the client or organization's needs. And they often are comprised of employees within the organization from different departments, so they're cross-functional. So that means, you know, you grab someone from IT, you grab someone from marketing, someone from HR, someone from sales, all of this type of thing, to create a team that is got a lot of different skills represented. They often have their regular job responsibilities on top of their responsibilities for the team, which, as you can imagine, means that a lot of employees are not interested in participating as members of these teams. So commonly project teams are just extra work. They don't really affect promotion or recognition or pay. So it'd be like if your advisor asked you, my dog is about to, yes, get in the shot. Okay, get down. Just wait a minute, sorry. So it'd be like if your advisor told you, okay, on top of your 4 or 5 classes you're taking, however many classes you're taking, on top of that, plus your extracurriculars, plus your job, plus everything else you have to do all day, we want you to be a part of this team. We're taking a student from every single department at Florida Southern, and we want you to join this team and do all this extra work for a project, but it's not going to affect anything for you. You probably wouldn't be too excited about that opportunity. So that's what a project team does. Production teams are the next one, and they're probably the most that's group-like rather than team-like, but they're still considered a team because they have some output goal that is tangible. So like assemblies and miners, construction crews, these are production teams. They produce something. One thing that's good about these teams is that the outputs that they create are easily quantifiable for measuring team performance. So if it's maintenance, you can see, did they fix the problem? If it's construction, did they complete the building they were building? Those sort of things. It's pretty easy to gauge how productive they're being. So yeah, definitely a team that produces good, tangible, objective outcomes. In addition, they often have top of the day meetings, beginning of the day. You get to work, you all say, okay, here's what we're doing today. They also have a decent amount of autonomy, but that can depend a bit on the type of task. I would say a construction work group might not have a whole lot of autonomy, other than maybe just how they choose to structure the time. But there's also a different term when they're incredibly autonomous, which is just autonomous work group, meaning they have a lot of freedom. So specifically, an autonomous work group is a type of production team that has a lot of control over their functions, including planning their shift operations, allocating their work, determining the priorities, performing tasks in a variety of ways, and recommending new hires. So, you could imagine maybe certain types of jobs would be more likely to have these types of work groups versus others. But it is beneficial to use this type of team because it enhances communication and makes the work environment a little more enriched. So people are usually more satisfied with that. And last of the types of teams I'm going to talk about is virtual teams, which is becoming increasingly relevant. I definitely see a shift towards virtual teams, or I even saw this shift before all of the craziness, before all of the chaos and everyone was moving online. This was going to be the future. And I think, honest to God, that this whole situation has really just sped up the process that we're going to move more virtual. So virtual teams, of course, are teams that are widely dispersed and they work together towards a common goal. They're linked through computers or other technology. Virtual teams not only are essential right now, but they have a lot of benefits. And one of these that I thought of recently is actually better, more lasting jobs. People move a lot these days. People live all over the place. And one thing that's a big factor is sometimes, if you live with a partner, your partner gets a job offer or you get a job offer and you're going to move somewhere. If your work allows for virtual work, then they don't have to worry about losing a good worker because they're moving with their partner. They can still stay on the job and just work from wherever they had to move to. So it's great if as many places as possible do as much telecommuting virtual work as possible. But of course, I do think that research on this area is going to explode, and we're going to find that there's a lot of variation in how people respond to virtual teams depending on their own individual needs and resources and things like that. The virtual teams, of course, because of this great ability to work in dispersed locations, we often have members who are even more diverse than traditional teams, right? So like, for example, I have a job part-time that I work with a team where my boss is located in California and two of my coworkers are in India. I had another coworker in Chicago. So we had a lot of different people with different cultures and different views all over the world. And because of this, they tend to include more cross-cultural training and things like that. But they definitely also have a broader reach, which makes a lot of benefit for certain types of careers. It's possible with virtual teams that members meet periodically in face-to-face settings, but usually not too often, especially when the scenario is so dispersed as the one I just described. I've only seen my boss a couple times in my life, mostly at conferences. And so yeah, it can depend. And then of course there's work that does a little of both, where sometimes you go into the office and sometimes you work online. It does, there is some research, and as I said, I think that more and more of this research, or more teams research at least, is going to go on to virtual teams. But some that exist so far has found that virtual teams are more effective when members are good at certain interpersonal behaviors. For example, being able to exchange ideas without criticism, agreeing on responsibilities and meeting deadlines. And also the virtual socialization which is very different from more traditional socialization. And I think it's a good idea for you guys to start thinking about the effects of going virtual and on our, interpersonal skills, not only, but needs. And I'm not one of those people who's going to sit here and say, oh, all these kids today with their social media and everything being online are losing social skills. I don't believe that we're losing social skills. I think that social skills are changing, because using social media effectively is a huge skill and it's really important. And using virtual things effectively is just as important. And some people are great at it and some people are not so great at it. I'm probably one of those not so great at it. And I think it's definitely the currency of now, being able to market yourself online is critical. And so this is a new type of social skill that I think definitely people need to be paying attention to. Also, virtual communication, of course, learning to express yourself through, email, calls, conference calls online, text even, whatever it may be. This is also a new type of communication. All right, so that's it for the first part of this lecture. I will come back soon with a video on inputs, processes, and outputs in Teams.